A man kneels in the dark. Wine and old sweat hang in the air of the royal bedchamber. His name is Artabanus, captain of the royal guard, the sharpest blade in the Persian Empire, sworn to one task and one task only, to stand between his king and death. Tonight, he breaks that oath. A short bronze dagger sits in his hand. Moonlight crawls along its edge. He was trained to kill anyone who entered this room with bad intent. Now he is the one who entered. He steps closer to the bed where Xerxes sleeps. He raises the blade. He drives it into the king's chest. What does a ruler have to become? For the man sworn to die for him, to decide the empire can only be saved by killing him. This was not a clean palace coup. The official chronicles, written by the men who survived, smoothed 465 BC into a tidy fable of ambition and betrayal. They lied. The murder of Xerxes was not a hunger for the throne. It was the last response to a private sickness that had spread into the bones of the empire. A king's forbidden obsession with his own sister-in-law. A desire he could not cage. An act of mutilation so far past the line that loyalty itself snapped in two. The men who killed Xerxes did not want his crown. They wanted to scrub it clean. This is not just a story. It is a case file for regicide, walked through the way the king's own chief of security would have walked it. Step by step, we will watch Xerxes slide from beaten warlord into a domestic tyrant whose appetites turned his most loyal protectors into his executioners. This is the anatomy of a king's damnation, told by the hand that finally ended him. Before we sink into the rot that ate the Persian throne, tell us where you are listening from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep digging up these buried histories together. You're watching Ancestral, the best dark history channel in the world. The year is 480 BC. The Hellespont is choked with broken timber and bloated men. What remains of the largest fleet the world has ever floated drifts home under a low gray sky. At the head of that ruined column is the flagship of Xerxes, King of Kings, ruler of the Achaemenid Empire, from the Indus to the Aegean, from the cataracts of the Nile to the steppe above the Caspian. He is not on the deck. He sits below, in a sealed cabin, shutters drawn, refusing to look at the sea that humiliated him. This is the same man who, 2 years earlier, watched his engineers lash 374 ships side by side across the strait at Abydos to make a bridge of timber and flax. The same man who, when the first bridge was torn apart by a storm, ordered the executioners to behead the builders and the water itself to be whipped 300 times. Herodotus tells us the brand was pressed into the waves. The chains were dropped in. The insults shouted into the surf were written down. The same man who watched Athens burn from a throne carved into the slopes of Mount Aigaleos. He had counted the columns of smoke rising from the Acropolis and believed he had ended the West. Then came Salamis. September. A narrow strait less than a mile wide. A trap sprung by an Athenian named Themistocles, who fed Xerxes a false message through a slave called Sisinus. The Persian fleet sailed in at dawn, convinced it was chasing a routed enemy. By midday, the water was a graveyard. Aeschylus, who fought there with a spear in his hand, would write the scene 7 years later in the Persians. He described the sea no longer being sea, but a mass of wrecks and corpses, and the shrieks rising over the water until the night ended them. Xerxes lost 200 ships. He lost his brother Artabanus, commander of the Ionian wing, dragged under by his own armor. He lost the admiral Ariamenes, speared through the throat by an Athenian marine. The next summer at Plataea, The general he left behind, Mardonius, was killed by a stone thrown by a Spartan named Achaemenid, and the land army of Persia broke. 40,000 survivors, by the count of Herodotus, limped back through Thessaly under Artabanus. Now Xerxes returns to Susa not as a conqueror, as a survivor of his own ambition. The god has discovered he is only a man, and the discovery has carved a hole in him. Into that hole, something starts to seep. Susa in winter is a city of mud brick walls, the color of old blood and palms that rattle in the wind off the Zagros. The royal complex sits on a terrace above the Shar River. The Apadana, the great audience hall begun by his father Darius, covers nearly 10,000 square meters. Its roof held up by 72 columns of stone, each more than 60 feet tall, each topped with twin bulls carved from a single block. The walls are skinned in glazed brick, lions the color of saffron, archers in yellow and blue. The immortals, 10,000 strong, frozen forever in procession along the corridors. The court receives him the way courts always receive failed kings, with perfect protocol and zero warmth. The prostrations are flawless. The proskinesis, forehead to floor, held until the king gives the sign. The incense, frankincense, brought up the royal road from Gera, burns in bronze braziers shaped like winged sphinxes. The gold gleams on every column. But the temperature has dropped. The fear that used to radiate off the throne, the heat that held 1,000,000 square miles in line, is cooling. In the corridors of the harem, in the kitchens, in the quarters of the magi, the whispers are no longer about Greece. They are about the king, about his sleep, about his appetite, about whether the hand on the empire is still steady. It is not. Xerxes stops attending war councils. The dispatches pile up in the chancery. A revolt is brewing in Egypt under a man named Inaros. The satrap of Bactria, his own brother, Hystaspes, is rumored to be raising private troops. Reports from the Phoenician coast warn of unrest in Sidon. The royal scribes, trained in cuneiform and Aramaic, wait for orders that do not come. Achaemenes, satrap of Egypt, and another half-brother of the king, sends letter after letter. They go unanswered. The world outside the palace has taught Xerxes a lesson he cannot stomach. The world resists. The world fights back. The world burns your ships. The palace does not. Inside these walls, his power needs no logistics, no supply lines, no strategy. Inside these walls, every body that moves is his property. They cannot refuse him. They cannot flee. They cannot rise in revolt across a sea he cannot cross. The king who lost an empire turns inward, and his hunger turns with him. The corridors become his new battlefield. The servants, the wives, the daughters of his nobles, his new conquest. In that gilded cage walks a man who is everything Xerxes is no longer. Mecisteus, his own full brother, son of Darius and Atossa, born of the same womb as the king, a soldier, hard, competent. He had commanded a division of infantry in the march on Greece. He had stood at Doriscus when the army was counted, 10,000 at a time, herded into a circle drawn in the dirt. He had watched the campaign collapse with his own eyes, and he had said it to the king's face. According to Herodotus, when Xerxes blamed his own admiral Artemisia for the loss at Salamis, it was Mecisteus who told him the truth, that the fault was the king's alone. Few men in the empire would risk that sentence. Mecisteus did. The army respects him. The old nobility admires him. He holds the satrapy of Bactria, the eastern wall of the empire, where the cavalry that protects Persia from the Saka tribes is raised. He is a pillar of the order that existed before Salamis broke it, and at his side is his wife. Herodotus never gives her a name. History has flattened her into a silhouette, but in this moment, she is the most consequential woman in Persia. She is described as a woman of dignity and a beauty so calm it does not need to perform. She moves through the court without seeking the king's eye. That, more than anything, is what catches it. Xerxes sees her. Xerxes wants her. It is that primal. It is that small. He starts the way kings start. Gifts left in her chambers, perfume from Arabia, lapis from Badakhshan, a comb of carved ivory, invitations to the paradise gardens west of the palace, where the king's gardeners had imported cedars from Lebanon and pomegranates from the south. Words layered with meaning underneath the politeness. She refuses, not loudly, not with insult, quietly, firmly. A door closed and locked from the other side. For a man with any restraint, that would have ended it. Xerxes has no restraint left. His ego was already shattered on the rocks of a Greek strait. A refusal from a subject, from his own brother's wife, does not register as a private rejection. It registers as another Salamis, another defeat. Inside his own house this time, he cannot lose again. So the strategist in him wakes up. The general who could not breach Athens prepares a different siege. If he cannot take the mother, he will take the daughter. Her name is Artaÿnte. She is the child of Mecisteus and the woman who refused him. She is also his own niece, and there is a darker thread the sources let slip. Xerxes had already married off his eldest son, Darius, to this same girl. Artaÿnte is not just his niece. She is his daughter-in-law. To reach her, he has to step across two beds, his brother's and his son's. He summons her. He drapes her in jewels heavy enough to bend a girl's neck. He gives her silks dyed in colors a provincial queen would never own: Tyrian purple, Median crimson. He whispers things in her ear that no uncle and no father-in-law should whisper. He builds her a world in which she is the center of the sun. She is 16, 20. The sources will not tell us. She is too young to understand what she has become. She agrees. The affair is not hidden. Xerxes wants it seen. Every guard at every door knows. Every cupbearer. Every eunuch in the women's quarters. The king is publicly undressing the honor of his own brother's house, brick by brick, and he wants the empire to watch him do it. The message is simple. Nothing is sacred. No bond of blood. No vow of marriage. No code older than him. His will is the only law. The men of the royal guard stand at their posts and watch it happen. The Melophoroi, the apple-bearers, the king's personal 1,000, named for the golden pomegranates fixed to the butts of their spears. Soldiers like Artabanus, captain of the guard. Men who understand a chain of command. Men who also understand loyalty and honor, because they have sworn the oath to Ahura Mazda by the fire altar at Pasargadae. What they are seeing in the corridors of Susa is not a king strengthening his line. It is a king turning his blade on his own camp, a poison entering the well. And the most powerful woman in Persia is watching too. Not Artaÿnte, not the wife of Mecisteus, Queen Amestris. She is not just the king's wife. She is the political spine of the Achaemenid dynasty, daughter of Otanes, one of the 7 Persian nobles who overthrew the false Smerdis in 522 BC and put Darius on the throne. Her marriage was a fusion of bloodlines, a contract that bound the new royal house to the old conspiracy that founded it. Her sons, Darius the eldest, Hystaspes, and a boy named Artaxerxes, who will matter more than any of them, are the heirs of the empire. Her position is the position of the succession itself. To the royal guard, Amestris is not a person. She is an institution, and the king is humiliating that institution in front of the whole court. The affair with the niece does not just wound her pride. It opens a fracture in the order of inheritance. It introduces the possibility of a bastard son. It creates a rival faction inside the harem, which under Persian custom is its own court, with its own treasury, its own eunuch hierarchy, its own intelligence network. It tells every satrap watching from Sardis to Bactra that the rules have stopped applying. Amestris is known for her devotion to the fire of Ahura Mazda. She is also known for something else. Herodotus will record, decades later, that she once buried 14 children of noble Persian families alive as an offering to the god of the underworld when her own life was in danger, a capacity for patient, methodical cruelty when her position is touched. She watches her husband parade his niece through her own house. She does not scream. She does not weep. She does not confront him. She waits. A king this reckless will make a mistake big enough to bury him. And when he does, the queen will be standing over the grave. The mistake comes wrapped in cloth, a robe, one robe, but not the kind a slave weaves on a back loom. This one was long, intricate, blazing with color, the kind of garment that takes a noblewoman years to finish. Amestris wove it herself, with her own hands. It was a tradition for royal women going back to the founding of the empire under Cyrus, an offering of skill and devotion to a husband. She made it for Xerxes. For him, only him. The dye alone, the kermes red from the oak galls of Armenia, the indigo from the Indus, would have cost more than a satrap's annual tribute. It was a private symbol of her position as his queen. He wears it to his niece's chamber. Artaÿnte sees it. She runs her fingers along the threads. She tells him she wants it. The Persian sources behind Herodotus preserve a small scene here. Xerxes tries to bargain. He offers her cities. He offers her gold by the talent. He offers her command of her own army, an unprecedented gift for a Persian woman. The King of Kings is begging a girl to ask for anything else, because he has already sworn, by the royal oath that cannot be broken, to give her whatever she names. She names the robe. A sane king refuses. A king with one functioning advisor refuses. The robe is not a gift to be regifted. It is the queen woven into fabric. To put it on another woman is to publicly remove the queen and crown the mistress in her place. Xerxes gives it to her. History does not always turn on battles. Sometimes it turns on a piece of cloth worn through the wrong door. The collapse of Xerxes is the proof that private rot, given enough time, becomes a public catastrophe. That the appetites of one man, unchecked, can crack the spine of an empire. If you believe these stories deserve to be told the way they actually happened, without the gloss, without the polish the chroniclers put on them, then you are already one of us. You understand that the past is not a list of dates. It is a series of warnings. We built a place for people who hear those warnings. It is called the lineage, our inner circle. By joining, you stop being just a viewer and become a patron of the work, the research, the writing, the long nights it takes to dig these histories up and tell them right. You get early access to our documentaries and perks reserved for the family. If this is your mission too, click the link in the description and join the lineage. Keep these histories alive with us. The next morning, Artaÿnte puts on the robe. She does not hide in it. She walks. through the long colonnade where the painted immortals stare from the wall, past the doors of the queen's apartments, past the noble women of the court taking their morning tea in the side rooms, past the bowed heads of servants who have served Amestris since before this girl was born. The robe drags slightly behind her on the polished floor. The bells stitched into the hem make a small sound with every step. She wants it seen. She wants the whole palace to understand what the threads on her shoulders mean. The palace understands. A silence drops over the corridors. Courtiers freeze mid-step. A cupbearer carrying a phial of wine stops, the bowl half-tilted. Servants find reasons to look at the floor. The eunuch Mithridates, chief of the inner chambers, turns and walks the long way around to avoid passing her. In a court where every gesture is a sentence and every fabric is a rank, this is not vanity. This is an execution carried out in silk. Xerxes has taken the symbol his wife wove with her own hands and draped it over the shoulders of the girl he is using to destroy his brother. He has, in front of the entire ruling class of Persia, declared that the mother of his heirs ranks below his niece. Every eye in the palace turns to one place: the queen. Amestris is in the inner court when she is told. The messenger is a young eunuch. He does not finish the sentence. He does not have to. She rises. She walks the length of 3 corridors without a word. Her attendants, 2 maids of median birth, an old nurse who has been with her since the marriage, follow at the correct distance. She sees the robe on the girl. Her face does not move. She does not look at Artaÿnte. She does not look at the courtiers waiting to see if she will break. She looks at her husband. One long, quiet look across the polished floor. In that look, 3 deaths are decided. The girl's, the mother's, and eventually his own. The queen now has her cause. She has been struck in public. She will strike back. Not tonight. Not this week. Persian revenge does not run. It walks. It plans. It chooses its hour. There is a feast on the Persian calendar she has already marked. The king's birthday. The one day of the year when, by ancient law set down since the time of Cyrus, the King of Kings cannot refuse a request made by his queen. That day is months away. She will wait for it, and the hour she chooses will not begin with Artaÿnte. It will begin with her mother. The Persian calendar bends around one day, the king's birthday. The Greeks called it tukta, a corruption of the old Persian word the Persians themselves used for the rite. It is the hinge of the year, the moment when the empire renews its contract with the man on the throne. Tribute caravans arrive for weeks beforehand, hauling silver ingots from Lydia, ivory tusks from Kush, sealed jars of cinnamon from Arabia Felix, blocks of lapis from the mines of Sarai Sang in the Hindu Kush. Herodotus says, the king bathes that day in oil pressed from sesame and washes his hair in a special preparation the Greeks could not name. Cattle are slaughtered in the outer courtyards by the 100 and roasted whole on iron spits, as long as a man is tall. The Magi tend the sacred fire at the palace altar without sleep for 3 nights. But the day is governed by something older than tribute. It is the day of the royal boon. By a custom set down in the time of Cyrus, the King of Kings cannot refuse a request made of him on his birthday. Not one. The Persians had a word for this gift: baji, the king's tribute paid back to his own people in the form of a granted wish. Refusal would shatter the divine fiction that holds the empire together. It would prove him human. It would prove him a man whose word has limits. The custom is a display of power. It is also a knife left on the table. For weeks before the date, the palace breathes through clenched teeth. The robe is still on Artaÿnte's shoulders. The court has not forgotten. Servants speak in fragments behind the kitchen pillars. The harem eunuchs trade rumors at the bathhouses outside the inner wall. The chief eunuch of the king's chambers, a man named Hermotimus of Pedassa, whom Herodotus knew by reputation, says nothing and watches everything. The queen has said nothing for months. That silence has become its own sound. The day arrives. It is winter in Susa. The wind comes off the Zagros carrying the cold of the high passes. Charcoal braziers burn in every corner of the Apadana. The hall fills with the empire's flesh. Satraps from Sardis and Ecbatana, from Memphis and Damascus, the chiliarchs of the army with their staffs of office. The 7 great noble houses descended from the conspirators of 522 BC, the houses of Otanes, Intaphernes, Gobryas, Megabyzus, Aspathins, Hydarnes, and the royal Achaemenids themselves. The Magi in white linen with their barsum rods. The royal scribes in leather aprons, styluses tucked behind the ear, ready to record every grant of office made that day. Xerxes sits on the lion-footed throne of cedar plated in gold. The parasol is held above his head by an attendant whose only duty in life is to hold that parasol. The fly whisk of horsehair moves in slow arcs over his crown. 2 spear-bearers stand behind the throne. A third figure, the king's personal cupbearer, stands at his right, with a phial of wine the king will not drink until tested. Court doctors burn rue and frankincense against the evil eye. The proskinesis ripples through the hall in waves. Forehead to floor. Hold. Rise. Repeat. The royal heralds call out the names of those granted audience. Land grants are read aloud. A satrap is elevated. A treasurer is replaced. The machine of state runs smoothly. Then Amestris steps forward. A path opens in the crowd, the way water parts around a stone dropped from a height. The murmuring stops in sections, row by row, as the men on the floor turn to see who is moving. By the time she reaches the dais, the hall has gone quiet enough to hear the snap of the brazier flames and the small bells stitched into the hem of her robe. She is not dressed for a feast. No flowers in her hair, no bracelets stacked up the wrist. A dark robe, the color of dried wine, hemmed in gold thread. Her hair bound under a simple diadem. The face of a woman who has already done the arithmetic. She performs the prostration. She rises. She looks her husband in the eye across the polished floor. She makes her request. She does not ask for Artaÿnte. That would be jealousy. That would make a martyr of the girl and tie the king to her memory through guilt. Amestris is not jealous. Amestris is a strategist. Her father Otanes had been one of the 3 conspirators who argued, after the death of the false Smerdis, for a Persian republic instead of a king. She comes from a household that knows how power is built and how it is taken apart. She asks for the girl's mother. She asks for the wife of Mesistes. Xerxes freezes on the throne. The request lands like a stone in a still pool. Every noble in the hall understands it in the same instant. The queen is not killing the rival. She is burning the house that produced the rival. She is sending a notice to every aristocratic family from the Indus to the Aegean. If your daughter becomes the king's plaything, the punishment will not stop at her bedroom door. It will reach your wife, your sisters, your mother. The chiliarch of the guard, standing 2 paces behind the throne, does not move his head. He does not have to. His eyes find the queen, then the king, then return to the middle distance. Behind him, somewhere in the line of apple-bearers along the wall, Artabanus is at his post. Xerxes sees the trap close around his ankles. To grant the request is to hand his own brother's wife to be carved up in front of him. It is to break the sanctity of his own blood. To refuse is to break the boon, and with it the divine theater that says the king's word is law. The royal oath is enforced by the god Mithra, who in Zoroastrian belief watches every contract and punishes every break. To refuse is also to insult the god. He has spent his life building the theater. He looks at Amestris. Her face does not move. He looks across the hall at the satraps watching him. They are not waiting for justice. They are waiting for the answer that tells them what kind of king they still serve. Among them is Tritante Echmes, satrap of Babylonia. Among them is Megabyzus, the younger, future general of Artaxerxes, a boy of perhaps 15 standing beside his father. They will all remember this day. He says yes. The guards take the wife of Mesistes from her house before sundown. They do not take her to a cell. They do not take her to the dungeons under the citadel of Susa, the ones cut into the bedrock where political prisoners had been held since the reign of Cambyses. They take her to the queen's private apartments on the upper floor of the harem complex. What happens there does not appear in any royal inscription. The Achaemenid scribes carved their king's victories into the cliffs at Behistun in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, and at Naksh-i-Rustam above the tombs of Darius and Xerxes himself. They left no record of this night. Our only witness is a Greek named Herodotus, born in Halicarnassus around 484 Prienphi, before BC, a few years after the event, who collected the story decades later from Persians who had been there as young men or from their children. The Persians considered him an enemy. Sometimes only an enemy will write down what happened. Amestris does not order a death. Death is not the lesson. The same royal guards who served the king hold the woman down on the floor of the queen's chamber. The floor is paved with bricks glazed turquoise. The lamps are filled with sesame oil and cast a yellow light. Under the queen's eye, with the queen counting the cuts, they take her apart. They cut off her nose. They cut off her ears. They cut off her lips. They cut out her tongue, so she cannot say her own name or name her attackers. They cut off her breasts. Herodotus records, in one short line, what is done with the pieces. They are thrown to the dogs in the courtyard below. She is not killed. She is kept breathing. Amestris wants a message, not a corpse. The guards carry what is left of her back to the house of Mesistes and leave her on the floor of the courtyard inside the gate. This is not sadism for its own sake. It is political communication carved into a body. Amestris has turned a noblewoman into a living monument, a walking advertisement, a breathing notice posted on the door of every great house in the empire. This is the price of being humiliated in a court where the king will not keep order. Xerxes, who has just signed off on this, now has to face his brother. His guilt does not show as remorse. It shows as panic, dressed as diplomacy. He summons Mesistes to the palace before the news of the mutilation can reach him. Messengers run through the streets of Susa to find the satrap of Bactria before he can get home. Mesistes comes. He still does not know. The king receives him in a private chamber, not in the great hall. The walls of this room are decorated with hunting scenes in painted plaster, a king on horseback spearing a lion. Xerxes makes his offer in the language of a market deal. He will give Mesistes one of his own daughters, a princess of the royal house Achaemenid, as a new wife, higher in rank than the wife he has, the mother of future princes. Mesistes does not understand yet what is being offered or why. This is the moment in the story where the men in the room, the chiliarchs along the wall, the chamberlain by the door, the eunuchs at the curtain, go cold. Not from cruelty. They have seen cruelty. They are cold because the king is trading. He is offering one woman for another, the way a Phoenician trades amber for tin at the wharves of Tyre. He is trying to settle the destruction of his brother's wife with a daughter swapped in and a clean line drawn through the ledger. He no longer understands what the words honor, grief, or blood mean. He understands transactions. That is the moment the palace elite begins, quietly, to count him out. Mecisteus refuses. He does not know yet what has been done. He simply tells the king he loves his wife, that he has sons with her, that he will not put her aside for a princess, or for any reason. He says it with a soldier's bluntness. He asks the king's permission to go home. The king, relieved that the conversation is over, lets him go. Mecisteus walks home through the colonnades of Susa under the thin winter sun. The streets are still hung with banners from the birthday festival. The guards at the outer gate of his quarter salute him. He returns the salute. He has no idea that the palace behind him is holding its breath. He opens the door of his own house. He finds her in the courtyard. He finds the mother of his children, the woman he was just offered a trade against, breathing through what is left of a face. The blood on the bricks is still wet enough to reflect the lamps lit at dusk. His sons are standing against the inner wall. Servants are pressed into the corners. No one has dared move her. No one has dared bring water. Inside Mecisteus, something quiet and very old breaks. The brother dies in him in that minute. The general remains. He understands now. The king is not his brother. The king is a man who sat on a throne and signed the order. The honor of the court is paint on a wall. There is no law in Susa that can protect anyone from the appetites of the throne. There is no court to appeal to. The court is the disease. There is one answer left. He gathers his sons. The eldest is named in no surviving source. The Persian historian Ctesias, writing a generation after Herodotus, mentions that Mecisteus had several. He tells them what has happened in as few words as a man can use. He tells them they are leaving before nightfall. They will ride east. They will not stop at the relay stations of the royal road for more than fresh horses. They will ride for Bactria. Bactria is his. The satrapy he has governed since Darius gave it to him in the last years of his father's reign. The Bactrian capital at Bactra, modern Balkh, sits on the trade routes that carry gold and lapis west and silk east. The cavalry there knows his face. The Saka horse archers along the Oxus serve under his commanders. The fortified cities of Bactra and Marakanda, of Drapsaka, and the strongholds of the Sogdian Rock hold garrisons loyal to him personally, not to the distant throne in Susa. He will raise an army of the eastern frontier. He will march it back across the empire. He will burn the palace at Susa to its foundations. He will kill his brother. The dark history of the Achaemenid Empire is full of stories like this one. Accounts of power, of paranoia, of blood spilled in private rooms that ends up shaking thrones. The version you are listening to has one foundational source: the Histories of Herodotus. 9 books, written in Ionian Greek, completed sometime around 430 BC. It is not just a history book. It is the archive that preserved this story, and dozens like it, from being erased by the scribes who only wrote what the kings allowed. This was the primary source for the script you are listening to right now. If you want to read this episode the way it survived for 25 centuries, you can find the book on our shelf. Click the View Products button on your screen It is sitting on the official ancestral shelf, waiting. Treat it as required reading for anyone serious about the past. The book is not all that is there. We curated a small collection of dark memorabilia, pieces tied to the eras we cover, objects meant to put the period in your hands. Open the shelf while the story continues and see what is waiting. Mecisteus and his sons ride out of Susa before the city gates close at the second watch. They take the royal road east, the same road built by Darius, to carry imperial messengers from Sardis to Susa in 7 days. Herodotus calls it the longest paved road in the world. It runs through 111 relay stations, each one a day's ride apart, each one stocked with fresh horses and provisions. They will ride it the other way, and ride it faster than any messenger has ever ridden it. The relay stations hand them fresh horses without question. The satrap of Bactria is owed that courtesy, and no message has yet caught up. They ride through the salt plains east of Susa, under a thin winter moon. They cross the foothills of the Zagros, where the road climbs into pine. They push north toward Ecbatana, the summer capital, set against the slope of Mount Alvand. Snow on the peaks, the town walls visible at dawn, ringed by 7 concentric circles, painted in 7 colors, according to Herodotus, the outermost white, the innermost gold. They do not stop at Ecbatana. They change horses and keep riding. Back in the palace at Susa, the king is told. His brother is gone. His brother's sons are gone. His brother is riding for the only province in the empire whose cavalry could march on Susa and win. The cold panic that grips Xerxes is the same cold that came over him in the cabin off Salamis. He knows what is loose. He knows the loyalty Mecisteus carries in the east. He knows that a rebellion led by a son of Darius, with a real grievance the whole court will repeat in every market between here and Babylon, is not a provincial revolt. It is a war for the throne. He gives the order. Not to negotiate, not to recall. He sends his fastest cavalry, the picked riders of the Immortals' mounted detachment, after his own brother with one instruction. Catch them on the road. Kill all of them. Kill the sons too. The chase is now riding through the dark. Mecisteus is hours ahead with his boys and a small escort of household retainers. The king's riders are behind him and closing, traveling lighter, changing horses more often, eating in the saddle, somewhere between Susa and the eastern mountains, on a road lit only by torchlight and that thin winter moon, between 2 relay stations whose names no source preserved, the 2 parties are about to meet. And in the corridors of the palace, the captain of the royal guard is standing at his post, watching the king pace the length of the audience chamber and back, listening to him mutter to himself in a voice that no longer sounds like a king's. Artabanus is beginning, for the first time in his life, to ask himself a question he has never been allowed to ask. What does an oath to the king mean, when the king has become the thing the oath was meant to stop? The king's order is given in a quiet room, not shouted, not raged, spoken in the level voice a man uses to dictate a tax assessment to a scribe. Xerxes calls in the commander of the Immortals, the 10,000, the Athanatoi, as the Greeks named them in their own language. The Persians called them the Anushia, the companions. Drawn from the noblest Persian and Median houses, replaced one for one the instant a man fell wounded or dead, their number fixed forever at 10,000. They carried spears with golden pomegranates fitted to the butt. The 1,000 at the front of the formation, the king's own escort, carried apples of solid gold instead. They wore tunics of scale armor under their robes. They were the sacred corps of the army that had crossed the Hellespont in 480 BC, and the symbol that Persia could not be diminished. Xerxes points them east. He does not order an arrest. He does not order Mecistees returned in chains for trial in the great hall under the 72 columns. He orders extermination. Father and sons, every man riding with them, every groom, every servant. The instrument built to defend the empire is being turned on the empire's own blood. For the officers in the room, the line has just been crossed in a way that cannot be uncrossed. The sacred guard has become a private blade. The king has reached past the boundary that even tyrants do not pass. The immortals ride out before dawn. They are mounted on horses bred on the Nisian plain south of Ecbatana, the same stock that pulled the chariots of Darius and would later pull the chariot of the last Darius at Gaugamela. They change mounts at every relay station along the royal road. They carry hard bread of barley and dried mutton in saddlebags of stiff leather. They do not light fires at night. They do not sleep at the stations. They sleep in the saddle in shifts, one man's reins tied to the saddle of the man riding in front of him. Mecistees is moving fast, but he is not running for his life yet. He believes the king's shock and the slow machinery of court grief will buy him time. He believes the road east, 1,500 miles between Susa and Bactra, is long enough for a man with a head start. He is wrong on both counts. The immortals catch the column somewhere on the high plain east of Ecbatana, past the city walls painted in their 7 concentric colors, before the road bends north toward the Caspian gates. No source preserves the place name. There is dust. There is the dry sound of hooves on packed earth that has not seen rain since the spring. There is the moment when Mecistees turns in the saddle and sees the standards of the king's own guard at his back, the lances level, the formation tight. He understands. There is no battle. A satrap's household guard of perhaps 20 or 30 riders cannot fight a detachment of the immortals. The commander rides forward and reads the order out loud. Persian custom required it. The king's word, spoken once, becomes the king's deed only when delivered to the man it sentences. Mecistees does not beg. Herodotus, who collected this story decades later from men who had served in the empire and remembered the names, says he cursed his brother into the open sky and named him as the killer of his line, the killer of his house, the killer of the blood of Darius. Then the spears come down. They kill Mecistees. They kill his sons in front of him, one after another, in the order Herodotus does not preserve. They kill the household retainers. They kill the grooms holding the spare horses. They strip nothing. They take no heads back for display. The order was death, not display. They leave the bodies on the road for the vultures of the plain and the jackals that come down from the foothills at night. An entire branch of the royal house, descended from Darius and Atossa, the line that would have provided governors and generals for generations, ends in the dust between 2 relay stations whose names no historian preserved. Not for treason, not for rebellion in arms, for walking into his own house and seeing what had been done to his wife on a queen's floor. The news rides back to Susa faster than it left. The relay system that Darius built to bind the empire together carries the report of its unraveling at the speed of fresh horses. The court hears it as a whisper passed at the bathhouses, in the kitchens, in the wine cellars beneath the audience hall. A new silence comes down over Susa, not the silence of respect, not the silence of grief, the silence of arithmetic. Every noble in the palace is doing the same calculation in his head. If the king will use the immortals to kill his own brother for the crime of being wronged, what protection does any other man still hold? The answer is none. The hidden rules that had governed Persian court life since the founding of the empire under Cyrus the Great in 559 BC, the unwritten contracts between the throne and the houses that supported it, are torn. The 7 great houses had survived the reign of Cambyses and his march on Egypt. They had survived the 7 days of usurpation by the false Smerdis in 522 BC. They had survived the early purges of Darius after the conspiracy that placed him on the throne. They had not seen this before. Men who had argued with the king in council the year before now stare at the polished cedar floor when the king passes. Artaÿnte, satrap of Babylonia, stops sending his routine dispatches. Artaphernes the Younger, satrap of Lydia, delays his tribute reports. Achaemenid, satrap of Egypt and half-brother of Xerxes, asks for clarification on routine matters he used to decide on his own authority. The empire begins to slow down, the way a body slows when the nerves stop trusting the brain. In the harem, Amestris counts her victory and goes quiet. Artaÿnte disappears from the sources. No one in the palace asks where she has gone. The story Herodotus heard does not say. Some later writers suggested she was strangled by a cord in her own chamber. Others suggested she was simply sent away to a distant estate and never named again. The silence is the answer either way. And in a small room above the guard quarters at the rear of the citadel, a group of men begins to meet. They meet after the second watch, when the corridors empty and only the night patrols move. They meet in rooms whose walls are thick stone, where a listener at the door would hear nothing through the heavy felt curtains that hung over Persian doorways in winter. At the center is Artabanus, captain of the royal guard, Hyrcanian by blood, sworn to the king by the fire of Ahura Mazda at the altar of Pasargadae, the man whose hand holds the daily duty rosters of the soldiers who stand outside the king's bedchamber, the man who knows which corridors are watched in the third watch and which are not. With him is Megabyzus, not the Megabyzus who conspired with Darius's generation in 522 BC, but his grandson, the son of Zopyrus, who held Babylon, a general with battlefield credit in Egypt and on the Greek frontier, married to Amytis, one of the king's own daughters, a son-in-law who has watched the family he married into burn itself down from the inside. With them is Achaemenid, a eunuch, chief chamberlain of the king's bedroom, the man who lights the lamps with sesame oil before the king sleeps and snuffs them with a small brass cap after the king has fallen. The man closest to the king after the queen. Ctesias of Cnidus, who served at the Persian court 2 generations later as personal physician to Artaxerxes II and read royal archives the Greek historians of the mainland could not reach, names them in his Persica. Diodorus Siculus, drawing on Ctesias in the 1st century BC, repeats the names. Justin, summarizing the lost 44-book Roman history of Pompeius Trogus in the 2nd or 3rd century AD, repeats them again. These men are not idealists. They are not republicans. They are not men who want the throne for themselves. They are conservatives. They believe in the Achaemenid line. They believe in the empire their fathers helped build under Darius. That is exactly why they have arrived at the conclusion in the small room. The king is the problem. The king himself. They build the case the way prosecutors build a case. Greece in 480 BC, where the fleet died at Salamis, and the army died at Plataea in 479 BC, and the aura of Persian invincibility died with both, the robe given to Artaÿnte and worn through the queen's corridor, the mutilation of the wife of Macystes on the floor of the queen's chamber, the murder of Macystes and his sons on the road east, the use of the sacred 10,000 as an execution squad against the blood of Darius. Each item makes the same point. The king has become the largest single threat to the empire he was born to govern. The verdict is taken in low voices. It is unanimous. The head must come off the body so the body can live. The plan is built the way Artabanus builds a guard rotation, without speeches, without flourish. He knows which men on the night shift are loyal to the throne as an institution and which are loyal to Xerxes as a person. He knows the corridor that runs from the inner court past the small fire shrine to the king's private chamber. He knows the eunuch who carries the wine. The eunuch is already at the table. He chooses a night in August of 465 BC. The court is at Persepolis for the summer ceremonies. The terrace cut into the slope of the Ramat, the mountain of mercy. The columns of the audience hall lit by oil lamps in alabaster bowls. The carved staircases where stone Medes lead stone Persians up to the king in eternal procession, carrying lambs, leading horses, holding lotus blossoms. The king has been drinking since the late afternoon. Wine from Arachosia mixed with water in the proportion 3:1, the style he had learned to enjoy during the Greek campaign. Achaemenid pours. Achaemenid always pours. By the third watch of the night, Xerxes is asleep in the inner chamber. The lamps burn low on their stands. The breathing under the linen covers is heavy and slow. The two spearmen, who normally stand at the inner door, have been rotated off by an order Artabanus signed earlier in the evening, citing a transfer to a perimeter post for the duration of the watch. Artabanus enters with Achaemenid. The eunuch carries a small lamp shielded with one hand. The light catches the gilded leg of a couch, the rim of a bronze brazier still warm from the dinner hour, the corner of a Median rug from Ecbatana, whose pattern of stags and lions Darius had imported at great cost a generation earlier. There is no rage in the room. The rage was used up months ago. What is left is the cold quiet of work that must be done before the next watch begins. He stands over the bed. The man under the covers is the same boy who watched Darius lay the foundations of the Apadana at Persepolis in 515 BC. The same young king who took the throne in 486 BC when Darius died on his way to crush an Egyptian revolt. The same commander who chained the Hellespont at Abydos, burned Athens in 481 BC, and wept on the slope of Mount Aigaleos as his fleet died beneath him. He is also the man who carved up his brother's wife to settle a domestic argument and sent the immortals to kill his own blood on a public road. Artabanus raises the blade. A Median short sword, the kind called Achaemenid, the same weapon the royal guard had carried since the time of Cyrus. He brings it down. There is a sound that is not quite a gasp. The body under the covers moves once, an arm rising halfway and then dropping. Then it does not move again. The King of Kings, ruler from the Indus to the Aegean, from the cataracts of the Nile to the steppes above the Caspian, is dead in his own bed at the age of 54. He had reigned for 21 years. The empire's largest internal threat has just stopped breathing. But Artabanus is not finished. He has a son of the king to manage. He goes from the inner chamber down the corridor lit by the low watch lamps to the room of the crown prince. Darius, the eldest son of Xerxes and Amestris, the heir designate. The young man who would, by every law of Persian succession, take the throne by morning. Artabanus tells the prince a lie that has been rehearsed for weeks. He tells Darius that his younger brother Artaxerxes has murdered their father in his bed and is moving to take the throne. He shows him a blade he claims was found beside the body. He urges the prince to strike first or be struck first. Darius believes him. Darius is young. Darius has just been told his father is dead. Darius takes a sword and moves toward his brother's chambers in the next wing of the palace. Artaxerxes, 18 years old, has already been briefed by Artabanus first, an hour earlier, with the opposite story. He is waiting. He kills Darius in the doorway of his own room. 2 heirs of Xerxes are dead in one night. Artabanus has thinned the line of succession to a single name, the youngest son. The son he can stand behind, the son who owes him a throne. Artaxerxes I takes the crown. He is 18. He owes his rule and his survival of that night to the captain of the royal guard. Artabanus believes he has built himself a king he can control from one step behind the throne. He is wrong. Within months, Ctesias says 5, Diodorus says 7. Artaxerxes pieces together the truth from interrogations of the eunuchs of the inner court, including Achaemenid himself. He learns who killed his father. He learns who tricked his brother into walking toward his death. He learns who was waiting at the door. He moves carefully. Artabanus still commands the guard. According to Ctesias, the king arranges a parade ground inspection. He calls Artabanus forward to compare the weight of their armor as a soldier's joke. The 2 men exchange cuirasses. Then, before Artabanus can refasten the straps, Artaxerxes strikes him down with his own sword in front of the assembled regiment. Achaemenid is executed by the Persian punishment of the boats. 2 flat-bottomed skiffs are tied together with a man inside, fed honey and milk for as long as the body will accept them, and left in the sun until the insects finish what nature begins. Plutarch describes the method in detail when discussing the death of Mithridates of Chios a century later. It was reserved for the worst betrayals. Megabyzus survives because of his marriage to the king's sister and because he commands armies the new king still needs. He will later lead Persian forces in Egypt against the rebellion of Inaros. He will himself one day come close to rebellion against Artaxerxes. He will die in his bed at the age of 76. Amestris outlives them all. She lives well into the reign of her son Artaxerxes as queen mother, with her own treasury, her own court, her own influence over the succession of the next generation. Herodotus tells us in Book 7 of the Histories that in her old age she buried 14 children of noble Persian families alive as a sacrifice to the god of the underworld in payment for the gift of long life. She finds, on her own timetable, the men who killed Mesistes on the road east. She finds the men who once handled her husband's mistress and the men who served Artaÿnte's table. She settles every account in her ledger over the course of years. She dies of age, in her bed at Susa, having outlasted every figure in this story. The empire continues. The Achaemenid line survives another century and a third, until a Macedonian named Alexander crosses the Hellespont in 334 BC, defeats the last Darius at Issus and Gaugamela, and burns the columned hall of Persepolis to the ground in 330 BC, in revenge, the Greeks said, for the burning of Athens by Xerxes 150 years earlier. The cedar roofs collapse onto the painted floors. The 72 columns crack. The glazed brick of the Apadana, where the lions had paced in saffron for 2 centuries, fades and falls into the dust. But the story of the night in 465 BC remains. It survives in Herodotus, who heard it from old men who had served at the court of Artaxerxes. It survives in Ctesias, who read the royal archives a generation later as the king's own physician. It survives in Diodorus and in Justin, summarizing histories that no longer survive in their original form. It survives because the lesson is older than Persia and older than empire. Power without limit always finds the throat closest to it. The man who cannot be told no eventually has to be told no by a blade in the dark. And the men who finally speak the no are almost never the ones who hated him. They are the ones who loved what he was supposed to be. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this descent. If this story held you, prove it. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. Send it to one person who needs to understand how fast a throne rots from the inside when the man on it stops being told no. Your engagement is what keeps these investigations alive and lets us push deeper into the next forgotten room of the past. You've just watched another premium documentary by Ancestral, your ultimate history hub on YouTube. The descent does not end here. Another video is opening on your screen now. Click it. Step into the next dark room with us. It is the necessary next stop on this journey. Watch it now.